So in forming the leather and the Kydex for this Beretta, you don't want to just have it on a flat surface and form the leather around on one side all the way around the thickness of the gun, and then form the Kydex on the other side in the same manner, because both sides of that clamshell would be so thick that the gun would rock back and forth within the holster, and nobody wants that. So to cut down the thickness of this Beretta by a factor of 2 or in half, I made a template out of 3/4 inch plywood that the weapon will slip right into, and that cuts down the thickness enough that we can get a proper clamshell on both sides. Now there's a couple design challenges when we get into this. First of all, the grip of the Beretta is thicker than the front slide and the front barrel area, and you can see when I push in on it that it rocks a little bit, showing that it's flatter and thicker back here than it is up front. So what we'll do is we'll shim underneath so that we get a good, accurate representation of the weapon. And I also need to take a dowel rod and tape it to the top here. Otherwise, if you form it really good, then that front sight would get stuck in the gun and you couldn't get it out smoothly. So we'll tape a dowel rod right here so that it represents the front slide, sliding all the way through. Also, when we form the thumb strap, which is going to be for the Kydex, we're going to want to make another little wooden piece here to extend out further so that that Kydex stays nice and flat, but forms really well on the rest of the gun, and that way you'll have a good place for the thumb to go. When it comes time to do the leather, I'll just cut out a piece of leather. It doesn't have to be too accurate because I'll end up trimming the sides once I get it wet formed. But the one area that does have to be really accurate from the beginning is when we do the thumb strap that's going to go around the gun. So we'll want to cut that so that it's a good thickness to perfectly go around right here between the back strap and the hammer of the weapon, and we'll loop it all the way around so that when it forms, it's a perfect representation of the back slide of the gun. So when we form the Kydex coming across, we're going to have a spot for the thumb strap so that the strap coming around can buckle into it. So we're going to need the Kydex to come straight past the slide. So I cut out this little piece here, and I'll tape up that void there so that the Kydex can come straight across and terminate someplace over here. And then also, when we draw the pistol out of the holster, we don't want to have the front slide get caught on the holster. So I also cut a little dowel rod that I'll tape right here, and that way when I form the Kydex and form the leather, it'll leave a pocket or a slot all the way up for that front slide. And finally, when we form the leather and the Kydex, we don't want to have an open trigger guard, because the Kydex especially can form very deeply into the trigger guard, and it can actually form around the trigger, and you can obviously see that that could be dangerous. So I went over to the bandsaw and I cut out a couple pieces of wood that I'll slide and tape inside so that they're evenly spaced on either side of the whichever way the gun's turned, and that'll clear up that void there. Alright, so now we've got that dowel rod going across to protect that slot for the front sight, and we've got the trigger guard covered up, and then I also taped up this piece of wood here so that it's got a nice clean edge for the Kydex to come across. Alright, so I took some time and I cut out the leather, and it's going to go right over the holster like that. And this will be the thumb strap, so that'll go all the way around the back of the holster there. Then we'll come up right around to the trigger guard so that when this is wet formed and comes down here and gets trimmed away, it won't obstruct your ability to get your final firing grip on the weapon. And this looks pretty good. We got a little over 2 inches here to play with. So once we wet form it all around, we'll have plenty of room left to trim it. So now it's time to wet form. Alright, we got the leather all wet. We've got the thumb strap formed around and underneath the gun. Got the gun covered in saran wrap just so none of the water gets in there and damages any of it. It's a plastic gun anyway, but no sense in getting the wood or the gun wet if we don't need to. So the next step is to take this piece of foam rubber and we'll put that right over the top like that. And then we're going to take this piece of wood right here and we're going to clamp that on top, and we're going to put a ton of clamps on there to get good pressure for the best definition. Well, there it is, all clamped up. We'll let it sit for a day or two and see what we get. Alright, it's been 24 hours, so let's see what we got. Alright, so it's still very wet, but pretty good definition. I think that'll do pretty good. Now let's just pull this out from here. Got a real good definition around the thumb strap. So I think that's going to work pretty good. Well, I wasn't real happy with the first set of definition I got from doing the forms on this, so I took some wooden pieces like this and I shimmed underneath the gun to in effect raise it up, which would allow the Kydex cutout to have more definition around the gun. And I've taped a little piece of metal right here that'll come across the gun, and that's going to raise it up out of the way so that we can attach one of the paddles to the form without scratching the gun with the Chicago screws. And I've also put a piece of wood back here that'll allow for the thumb brake to come all the way across and form without getting warped. So we're going to take this piece of Kydex, we're going to put it over here in our heat press, and when the camera comes back on, we're going to be heat forming some Kydex. Alright, so the Kydex is all warmed up. I'm going to turn on the vacuum pump, and we're going to take this piece of Kydex out, set it in place, and get it heat formed, or vacuum pressed. You can see how floppy it gets once it's heated. I only have a short window of time to work with, but I want to get it just right. I want to get it out of the way of the safety, and I also want to get it out of the way of the magazine release. And that looks about good right there. Alright, here we go. Alright. So I'm going to come in here and really push these edges down. Ooh, that's hot. I want to get good definition all the way along the gun. That's going to be a lot better. Alright, so you can see here we've got the 1-inch strip of Kydex that's going to be the thumb brake. We'll trim it down to a nice comfortable spot around here. And we've cut the Kydex around the safety. I'll probably make another little cut here so it can be safe or on fire. And then it's been cut around so that when you trim it away over here, you'll be able to get your hand in without being obstructed by the holster. And you can also do an administrative reload of the magazine by activating the magazine release. We've got a dowel rod that comes across the top here, and that pushes the Kydex away to allow for that front sight to be pulled all the way out of the gun. But the rest of the definition we want as good as we can. Now, if you can see in the screen, this is the airport where the vacuum pump is sucking all the air out of. But if you were to just close the lid over that, it would just self-seal. So I put a green scouring pad over it that forces it to still be able to draw more air out of the press. And then I also have stuck a piece of rope that comes all the way around, across the top, and then over here to the bottom. And what that does is that forces a channel all the way throughout the vacuum press to suck all the air out. And this whole plan right here for this vacuum press is straight from Blue Light Tactical. It's based off of the press that they've made videos on and they also sell. And it works great. Alright, I think we're going to be good here. So I'm going to go ahead and kill the pump. And you can hear the air starting to come in. Ever so slightly, you start to lose definition as the seal gives way. Now there's enough air in there that we can open up the lid. And we can see, oh, that's really nice. Much better definition down here. Halfway, a true halfway across the gun. The one I did before, it wasn't a complete center form, and it would have just been way too tight with the leather. So this is going to be great. I'll just have to pry around this little metal piece here to get it off. And we're going to be good to go. Alright. You can see there's a little metal piece, so I'll just ever so gently pry back on the Kydex, and that should free that piece up to come out. There it goes. Alright. Well, after heat forming the Kydex to the right shape with the right depth, I put a groove that went all the way around the outer edge. It's going to be for the stitching groove. And then I stained and finished the leather, which I hope you can see how nice and shiny that is. And the leather has been laminated to that Kydex with a leather glue, and you can see I have all the clamps around holding it in place. I've set one side of the snap for the thumb brake, and I'll set the other one at the end when I'm sure that it's the right distance and everything. That'll be the last thing I do. So now that we have this laminated together with glue, and the glue's had plenty of time to dry, it's time to stitch. But before I can stitch, I can't just take a leather awl and punch through two pieces of leather to do my stitching. Instead, what I'm going to have to do is drill through the leather and through the Kydex on every little dot that we have marked out for the stitching. So the next thing to do is take off all these clamps, go out to the drill press with a really small drill bit, and drill every one of these holes all the way through the leather and through the Kydex to accept that nice saddle stitching. Alright, so I've got the holster in my stitching pony between my legs here as I'm sitting down in my favorite lazy boy chair, and I'm getting ready to do a saddle stitch. I'm about halfway through it actually. And a saddle stitch is where you use one piece of line and you have a needle on either end of the thread, And that way you're coming in and out of every hole in both directions. And it looks like one stitch, but it's actually two going through every single hole. So let's go ahead and continue on down the line here. Alright, so what I'm doing, I'm coming through the hole on the front of the holster. I grab underneath, flip it over, back through the hole with the other needle, and then I'm wrapping the line over that to create a little knot like when you start to tie your shoe. And I go through every single pre-drilled hole that way. Alright, so you get the idea. I'm going to continue all the way down to the bottom near the trigger guard of the holster, and then I'll backstitch a few stitches so that it doesn't come loose. And this is nylon thread, and it's waxed. So at the end, once I trim it off, then I'm going to burn the ends, and it curls up into a nice little ball just like the inside of parachute cord. And it creates its own little seal so the stitch doesn't come undone. Well, the holster's all stitched up, and I got the snaps on for the thumb brake, and now I'm gluing on the paddle. So I've just got it set there with the paddle and some super glue until it forms up, and then I'll take a couple Chicago screws and screw it down so that it can't come loose. And oh, by the way, since Melody's such a rabid Seahawks fan, I also made her this holster at the same time. And its paddle is also, having been super glued, is now drying.
Go.
Alright, here goes the leather one.
Oh.
Not bad, even right-handed. Alright?
I did.
Alright, I'm left-handed, but I still want to try out Melody's holster before I ship it off. Looks pretty good.